idealism prevails.
Make the world a better place.
Dear friends of the Kitchen Talks, once again, actually for the second time ever in the last 3 years, we have a chance to be actually true to a name, which is English Kitchen Talks for Küchengespräche, and we will do today one of our international installments, and for that I have the guest, the best guest I could wish for, and that is not saying too much. It is University-Professor Dr. Heinz Gärtner. No, that's a joke. Heinz Gärtner. Still Heinz. Sorry.
But not the companies. You know, you have this business
company,
the ketchup.
Yeah, ketchup.
In the US, when they don't know when I say Heinz, I say like the ketchup. So that's.
And it's
then they would understand. So
hot or mild? No. Heinz Gärtner, so to be clear about that. For those amongst you who do not know Professor Gärtner, he's one of the world's most eminent experts on international security matters. Indeed, at the moment, that I don't get it wrong, the English name of your institute is what?
International Institute for Peace. Okay. But at the same time at the Department for Political Science at the University of Vienna. So I did still teach, lecture, supervise students as well. So
and at the Danube University?
I teach as well, yeah. I teach at Kurz, Danube University.
And now that the Soros University is coming to Vienna,
yeah, I don't know. They didn't show interest in me.
Not yet. Not yet. They better because Pelinka.
I don't know whether he retired now. So he did it in Budapest, but now I don't know whether he will continue in Vienna.
Last time I saw him, he was still teaching there.
In Vienna already?
No, in Budapest.
No, in Budapest. I guess he stopped when they moved to Vienna. But they still have, in Budapest, they're not removing all of their facilities.
They will keep part of it open,
yeah.
And I guess Orban is pulling back a little bit. Yeah, should we start? No, we're not going to talk about that. But for anyone who is interested, I'm planning to talk about that more because it's a hugely interesting topic. But I'm glad you're here today. The last time we met, we covered a few topics in the German language, and I'll look at a few things today for the international community here in Vienna from a different point of view maybe. But let me ask you a question first pertaining to Vienna. Vienna is an interesting city. It's the capital of a rather small country, a country that has less inhabitants than any major city in the world. But politically it's important. It has got the second or third major UN United Nations seat. And in international politics it has repeatedly played a rather important role. I think the last time we could say was with the Iran contract, that the agreement. We spoke about that last time. I hesitate to guess, or from your point of view, is Vienna still an important international place and player in that sense, or has it lost much of that clout?
No, I still think that Vienna is a place, a meeting place, a mediating place. It has international institutions here. But having said this, Austria and the government and the mayor and the city have to do something about it. So they're not international institutions or politicians are not just coming automatically to Vienna and say, okay, Vienna is fine. So Vienna has to work on it and to offer it as a place. Of course, we were lucky that we have all these international organizations, which has to do with neutrality, of course, as well, like the IEA and the CTPTO. And the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation and all the OSCE Secretariat. So it's all here in Vienna. So it's largely due to neutrality. We, of course, here we are competing with Geneva, with Switzerland, but also with Helsinki, and so that's. But it doesn't mean that states would only meet in neutral countries. So other countries like Norway can offer mediation and as well. But I do think it's an asset. Neutrality is an asset in many ways. And but Austria has to do something about it, and also symbolically, because you mentioned the GCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and there was a competition between Geneva and Vienna in the final phase. Where would they negotiate it, finalize the GCPOA? And Secretary of State Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State, wanted to do it in Geneva, and Iran insisted on Vienna. And why did Iran insist on Vienna? Because Austria was the only Western country which did not close down the cultural center, cultural forum in Tehran after the revolution in '79. So the Iranians remembered that and said, okay, we still have good relations with Austria, let's do it in Vienna. So
which is really interesting because already under the Shah regime, and a lot of people that escaped Iran when the mullahs took over actually came to Vienna. We have got a rather sizable proportion of diaspora of Iranians here. So we have a long history with Persia and
all colors. Actually, it goes back to Franz Josef and to the monarchies. The monarchs, the Shah and the Kaiser, several times they met. So actually, of course,
as colleagues.
It's
As colleagues of empires. But this is interesting because I think, and we can take that step back, and I hope you'll follow us here. But you know, it's something very close to my heart to follow Austria through the ages. I mean, this diplomatic place that it is, it's been for a very, very long time. I mean, none the least because it's maybe also on this eastern, western, northern, southern divide. I mean, it has a very specific place in Europe.
Of course, the Cold War was not the most peaceful period in history, but Austria benefited from Vienna benefited from the Cold War. So we still have some legacy and institutions, embassies, intelligence agencies. They settled during the Cold War.
The third man, the dritte Mann.
But it's still continuing.
That's so what I wanted to know. It's still continuing. Okay.
And of course, Vienna is a nice place as well, and they don't want to go. And it's close to everywhere. It's close to the east. It's close to the south, and. We had also the legacy, of course, of Bruno Kreisky.
Friend of the Palestinians.
Yeah, and we are
himself Jewish.
We're about to lose this at the moment because we are too one-sided in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We are too one-sided to Israel because Austria immediately said, okay, the Trump so-called deal of the century is a good place to start with.
Which is very absurd. Which is for anyone.
Even the European Union didn't go that
yes,
far.
That is interesting to me. But many of the Visegrad countries would agree. So there seems to be, shall we go there? There seems to be a drift in a certain direction with Austria. But I think we'll get there. Good that you were saying, so still the agents are meeting here. So it's still a place where information is being exchanged.
And there's still this play going on, spy against spy. So that's still happening in Vienna. So that because all these agencies, they know each other, and but that's a spy story. But let's be serious. It's a political, diplomatic meeting place as well.
It still is.
And that's also the legacy of the Cold War. And Kennedy and Khrushchev met in Vienna, and Carter and Brezhnev met in Vienna. So it's a good place for summits as well. And I do think that it's important that we keep this tradition to all sides. Chancellor Kurz is now going to see Trump for the second time. I do think that's a good thing. It should not be too asymmetrical, the dialogue.
Indeed. Has he had a meeting with Vladimir?
Not recently.
Not recently.
Not recently. He's seeing Trump, but the point here is less Vladimir. The point is the Middle East. So the Middle East, Depends what Chancellor Kurz is going to say, because Middle East, the so-called peace plan, and also the GCPOA, on concerning Europe, the Nord Stream energy line. So Kurz has to defend the European Union and Austrian position. If he finds some overlapping interests, it would be fine. So that's what he should try. So she should go, but find some where Austria could again offer that we are host of maybe reviving the GCPOA talks. So in Vienna, bringing Iranians, Arab states for a regional dialogue to Vienna. Trump just has to not to object.
Yeah,
so,
well, the jury is still out on that. I doubt it will happen, though, honestly. My feeling is...
No, you're basically 70% right.
Okay, 70-30.
But or maybe even more. Yeah. But I do think it's worth trying, that Austria should offer it once again. Together maybe with Switzerland and Finland. So yeah, they could meet in capitals in various formats. Because regional dialogue at the moment is the only thing that would work. So with,
I agree, and maybe one thing could put the pieces together into the Iran-Palestinian Israel thing, and then finally Arabia bring them together.
Missile question. And
right. So bring it all on the table, and you would help along with your institute. I'm sure.
Actually, yes. And on an academic level, we would do this. Yeah. Actually, we had some debates about this already. So that's.
Let's have a full stop here, because this. Could you reach over there? Sorry, we'll leave that on camera. Our tea is there. Our tea is there. Yeah, this is yours. Keep yours. And wait, hold on. Maybe I take this weekend. So this is how basic we are. To the viewers out there, please donate to IP, because we urgently need some spoons and cups. No, that's fine. Don't worry. Yeah, thank you. But in the Anglican world, I'm interested. It's really interesting to me after so many years to see how even the culture in media differs still so much. But no, we'll stay on the European side. You just mentioned something that in the last couple of days couple of weeks has taken a very interesting turn, that pipeline. Because one of the things that really puzzles me is how the relationship with Europe has changed, or the attitude towards Russia has changed vis-a-vis the United States. And you wrote the book about the new relationship between Europe, or under Obama, especially the new relationship. Three books. Sorry, three books. Got to be careful in Austria with this. About that. Now, I heard, I think Bloomberg Network released that information, that the US had intervened with a Swiss company helping the Russians completing a piece of the pipeline under the sea, because the Russians do not have the technology to do so. And now that the Swiss company has dropped out, actually the pipeline project is in jeopardy. Yeah. Then the Russians say, oh no, we're going to work it out, but it's not that clear. So please enlighten us and the viewers to that, because I think that pipeline and energy dependency or independency, depending on how we look at it, has a lot to do with that relationship, or that newfound affection that the Europeans seem to harbor towards Russia, which in my humble opinion is totally nuts, but okay. Then,
and towards the US.
Yeah,
actually...
what is going on there?
I don't know the background, so who knows?
No, but I mean in the context of the relationship.
But the point is that for a couple of years now, the Trump administration is putting pressure on European countries to stop the Nord Stream pipeline. With the argument...
we can bring you liquefied gas.
Yeah, that's not the argument, but that's the reason. That's one of the reasons.
Sorry, I didn't want to give it away.
Yeah. They want to sell their own gas. That now actually they're saying we can help out if you don't get this gas from Russia, so we can help out. So they're offering it. But they want to do it for political reasons. I think this Nord Stream. They argue that Europe will become too dependent on Russia, but in terms of energy, Russia never blackmailed Europe, so I think that's much exaggerated. So, but they want to create some distance between Europe and Russia. That's basically, and it works. But the example what you mentioned, that the Swiss company withdraw from the project, is due to American pressure. Switzerland is a neutral country, but still the company is afraid of some sort of sanctions. So the US is putting sanctions on anybody who is not abiding by their rules. So and there is a possibility that other companies would
it seems like it right now.
Withdraw as well. I'm not so sure whether it's possible to kill the whole project, but still, because the European countries are still interested in getting gas from Russia, maybe it will be stopped for a while, but it is getting more difficult. I don't see this political dependence through a pipeline. So I don't. So that's no direct.
So you would not overplay that.
There's no direct link between energy supply and political dependence. So that's not really happening in Europe.
But do you sense that change in attitude? Because when I grew up in the 70s, 80s, you know, Russia remained the enemy, you know, before the gates, basically.
Yeah, but you know, still at that time, the Soviet Union was still a reliable supplier of energy. There was never a problem. Of course, at that time already the US sanctioned the Soviet Union already during the Cold War, and we had the same argument about dependency. But the Cold War was not really about energy, so the Cold War was about a different story. So that, and I still think now that the conflict what the US has with Russia, or NATO has with Russia, is on a different level. So that's
there we go. You see, there's written NATO. So I'll make this little thing. Let's move on to that, because that will give us a chance to maybe throw a flashlight onto that relationship. Now, we had two solid blocks when we grew up. I mean, even when I grew up, I have to say until '89. I mean, I was 19 in '89, so I remember very well. And the world was very simple. And it seems to have become more complicated. This may be just from my personal perspective, but maybe help me. Is there something to that? I mean, Austria was neutral, and there was NATO, and there was the Warsaw Pact. Come 1989, things surprisingly, I think to most, even the experts today admit that it was somewhat surprising that the East and the West, the bloc fell basically, and the wall came down. Now, when you live, I live in the Czech Republic, you live in Austria, depending on where you live, this is viewed slightly differently, whether that was the greatest thing that ever happened or whether it was not so great. Where do we stand today? The US, since Obama, maybe even before, but certainly since Obama, continuously withdraws. It's not influenced by its presence in Europe militarily, demands more and more of the European Union in terms of independence concerning its defense abilities. And at the same time, there's this chumminess with Russia, which is different than the Warsaw Pact, but still a military power. Please enlighten us as to what you see happening now. What's the role of NATO? You know, right now, von der Leyen, the former defense minister of Germany, is now leading the European Union, saying there will be an increase in spending on defense. What's going on? Who is our enemy now? What's going on?
Now, 89, 90, Russia, Soviet Union, and then Russia, after Gorbachev, Russia was very big. So economically and also militarily. So it still is. And the US and NATO seized the opportunity, of course, and had two waves of NATO expansion. There was not much of resistance, only rhetorically, from the side of Russia. There is it's still, historians argue about this, but there was this oral agreement between James Baker, the Secretary of State, and Gorbachev that the NATO would not expand to the East European country. So Russians still say that's they violated this promise, so they're all broken promises. And then Russia, especially with Putin, tried to recover somehow. It couldn't do it in the main areas, neither economically nor militarily. It is doing it nuclear, and it's doing it with political influence in other areas of the world, especially in the Middle East, Syria. So Putin is very skillful to put some stakes in other areas of the world to have more voice in the world. But we have all these processes with Turkey, Iran. Putin is talking basically to everybody concerning the Middle East. But concerning Europe, Russia is, I guess we mentioned that last time already, its defense expenditures only 8% of those of NATO. So, and Russia's economy is smaller than than the one of Italy. So
that's scary. I didn't know that.
So
although we don't know with Italy because
no, but it's the same area, like the same level like South Korea, Australia, things on that level. It's by no means a superpower, economic, neither militarily, let alone. But except
in the nuclear field. So that's why this is big.
And we do have an arms race. It's a modernization, which is one scary thing. But maybe we can talk about the nuclear thing as well. And now, of course, NATO, because we're talking about NATO, wants that, especially the US and already Obama, but Trump, but also NATO General Secretary Stoltenberg, they all want increase of military spending. But they need some enemy. So, and the closest enemy is Russia. So Russia cannot be a justification for increasing military spending.
And it's not really working.
It's
not really.
It's not really working. Another figure, because the US is saying, the NATO is saying, and NATO itself is saying, we have each NATO member has to increase its military expenditures to 2% of GDP. So, and Germany is always in the focus of the criticism. But if Germany raised its military expenditures to 2%, it already would spend about 20% more than Russia. So it's there's no relation between the reality that doesn't make.
So when you look at that, what do you see happening? What do you see happening? Because what is happening, especially under this administration, is there's a completely, one really thinks it's an alternative reality. There is something happening where the world view of the current US administration does not gel at all with at least not with the reality in Europe, and I don't think with anywhere else. What do you think ought or could or should be the European response if we can ever get to something like a European response?
What I see, what is dangerous now, that the idea what the European Union developed, and it's based upon this multilateralism and effective multilateralism is declining. So mainly due to this bilateral approach by the US administration, but also China has some supports multilateralism, but the Belt and Road Initiative is bilateral as well, and Putin is trying to do bilateral relations as well. So the bilateralism, nothing against bilateralism, but if you replace bilateral relations with, if you replace multilateralism with bilateral relations, that becomes very dangerous, because the idea is that the bigger one will win anyway. So that's the America First idea. So let's do bilateral talks.
But everyone has that. May I say, everyone seems to have that. So Russia first, China first, America first.
In political science, we have this term relative gains. So that media always say it's a zero-sum game, which is not true. So the relations Trump and also Russia, they're not thinking in terms of zero-sum game, especially not Trump, because he's a businessman. So he knows he has to give something, otherwise nobody would talk to him. So if always only he wins and the other loses. No, but we have this term relative gains that means both win, but I always win more. I always win more. So relative gains, and that's the idea of Trump's relations.
And then too with Russia. I give you Europe.
But the idea is what you're saying is that, of course, Xi Jinping and Putin have the same idea, no? So they think also in relative gains terms. Right. So that's why that we have this conflict. So who wins in which area, what more? So that's
which in a world. So may I get in there, because this is really interesting, because we're now at the neuralgic point of any conversation, in my opinion, when we're talking about peace. We're talking about bilateral versus multilateral. And it seems as if the idea of globalism or globalization is only being viewed as something that is business and corporate and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, can we agree, at least maybe we don't, but do we agree maybe that any problem that we face, any and all problems that we face of a serious nature, may it be a virus right now or may it be nuclear proliferation, needs to be addressed multilaterally?
As well, yeah, but bilateral is good, but bilateralism without multilateralism is bad. So,
right. So both.
No, I'm not against. But if you just do away with multilateralism, we are moving towards an anarchic world. So multilateralism, international institutions, they're a cushion against this anarchic world. So anarchic doesn't mean that everybody shoots against everybody, but anarchic means that you do not have an authority above you. And so we don't have a world government, but multilateralism is some sort of authority above the states, because you have to negotiate, you have to talk to each other, you have to cooperate, you have to find common solutions. So that's some sort of common authority, competent authority, what we call it. If we lose this, we are back to this anarchic world, what realists call that way. So
yes, realists call it. So what are the realists saying? I mean, my humble opinion is we're edging towards it, because what should be those institutions? I mean, the United Nations is being grossly underfunded, especially by the Americans, but by everybody else. There's nobody else that can step in. So you just said quietly, yes. Is that something
these multilateral institutions are losing all the way. So talking about these arms control agreements and treaties, so they're falling apart. We have this intermediate range missile treaty, the INF treaty, which has been cancelled and is dead now, which is not a multilateral treaty, but still it's a treaty. No, it was the UN said, yes. And we do have this GCPOA, which was a masterpiece of multilateralism, of effective multilateralism. We also will expect that the New START treaty will not be treaty about the limitation of intercontinental missiles, that will not be extended beyond 2021. But also we see, as you mentioned, that United Nations institutions are bypassed in many ways and not taken seriously by the big powers anymore, unless they get their way there, unless they get confirmed what they wanted to do anyway. Having said so, the United Nations still has in many areas great competence, but it would not be in the major conflicts. So when it comes to Korea, Middle East, arms control issues. But there are some areas,
the medical field,
development area,
and some support in terms of economics and so on.
Yeah.
There has been recently a debate whether Stephen Pickett and the vision. I mean, there's the one side that is saying, look, if you look at history, the last 100 years. When you look at the last 100 years, we've taken an incredible turn towards a more peaceful world. In real numbers, statistically, per capita, there's less aggression, violence, less war. And there's the other side that is saying that's not true. This may have been true between 1945 and 1990 or the 2000s, but that we are now moving again into a phase of a more aggressive, more a world of wars again. Is that true? I mean, that's from a scientist, from the side of somebody who's
yeah. Looking at the Pickett data, so they're not wrong, but they're looking at the very long-term trends, and you might be right. But if you split it up to certain time periods which can last decades, can be terrible. So they can be worse. So people living in this period, they don't care about these long-term numbers, whether in the long run, maybe things are improving, poverty is decreasing, battle death are decreasing.
But if you're poor or dying in a good time, then you're still free.
Yeah, and if you die in war, so it's because in many ways it depends also on the technology. So because technology, of course, creates less casualties in wars.
Because you complained last time when we spoke that you find it upsetting, and I want to repeat that in English because maybe there's a few more people listening. You said that you find it surprising and upsetting that there's not more of a peace movement, especially faced with the fact that all the nuclear treaties, one after one, are now being broken and obsolete.
No, I'm still surprised. I'm still surprised that it's not happening.
Why is that? Is the youth, I mean, normally it's the youth that pushes it. I mean, there's some heads, some figureheads, some intellectuals, and then the youth follows. Why isn't it? Because I also agree, I mean, it has not been as precarious as it is now.
No, yeah, of course we have this environmental movement now, which is dominating, which is important as well, and the youth is now focusing on the environmental issue, and we have the Friday for Future. And interestingly enough, the youth see this as a more immediate threat than a possible nuclear war. So I'm not sure why this is yet, because environmental degradation is important, but it's also a very long-term trend.
Doesn't help us if we nuke the place to pieces.
Sorry that I'm laughing.
No, that's always what I'm thinking. Like, hey, you know, if we don't solve the nuclear issue.
Yeah. And so if you have a nuclear war, the environment doesn't count.
It's done anyway.
It's done.
That's cooked anyway.
And we do have studies. If there is limited nuclear war between Pakistan and India, that's a couple of years, there have been several studies. So if there's a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan, there would be immediately a couple of 100,000 dead. And for many years, there will have nuclear winter, so there will be hunger, people would die from radiation.
Refugees, hundreds of millions.
So that's would affect basically the whole world. So not to speak about this big nuclear exchange.
As just a limited one to repeat it, and that's maybe the most likely one.
Less than Hiroshima, basically.
Less than Hiroshima. And that's maybe the most likely one. I don't want to go into the subject, but the situation now with Modi's new laws of citizenship vis-a-vis the Muslims, that's actually a very, very tricky situation. Okay, now we have established that. We're still wondering where that movement is. If somebody feels inclined to learn more about that and the lack of the peace movement, I think your institute has a lot of information, and your books are actually talking about many of those aspects. Let us come now to something that you will have an event about that in your institute very soon, and that's neutrality. And that, I mean, that makes sense to talk about that because in a way Austria, which as we all know was a superpower for 800 years roughly, unbelievable, 800 years, was one of the dominant powers on the planet. Then I mean, Hitler was an Austrian, so we know what happened then, and Austria's role in that disaster, Austria's role in the first disaster, in the First World War, and then a conclusion was drawn, maybe not by all Austrians, but the Russians, you know, agreed to giving freedom to Austria because Austria declared itself neutral. So that is for me a very interesting moment in history and an amazing place also for individuals to say, like, we've had enough of this. We are not going to involve in getting ourselves involved into any conflict unless we are attacked. Now, let's talk a little bit. Please do you talk a little bit about neutrality. What does it mean? And what does Austrian neutrality mean today, given the fact that we are part of the European Union?
Yeah, of course, we have this history of Austrian neutrality. In a minute, I will come back to it. And we talked about it in historical terms, in terms of international law, which is all important. And somehow people would say, oh, this small states neutrality issue, it isn't really relevant for this world today anymore. Then I was surprised myself in the last 5-6 years. I was traveling to several places in the world. So starting with East Central Europe, but going up to Middle East, Asia, and all of a sudden I discovered the idea of neutrality is coming back. People are looking for alternatives. States are looking for alternatives. So the neutrality was not a thing of the Cold War. Actually, it was an aberration of the Cold War because the Cold War was about blocks. And neutrality was the exemption of
the opposite. No, it was the galleons, the asterisks.
The and now in today's world, we talked about this multilateralism. Yeah. We are a new kind of multipolarity without multilateralism is emerging. So, which is a dangerous situation. So, we have several poles, not only the very big ones, but also local poles, and poles always means polarization somehow.
So you mean centers of power?
Centers of power, which are less and less controlled by international institutions. So, and there are states who cannot or do not want to be part of this. So they want to stay out. Like neutrality during the Cold War was lucky to stay out of this block building. Now we have some sort of, as you mentioned at the beginning, it was simple. Now it's much more complicated with many centers and poles, but nevertheless they are emerging. But there are some states who say we don't want to be entangled in their conflict. They have their conflicts, we want to stay out. So they're looking for alternatives. And one of those alternatives to keep some sort of sovereignty for them is neutrality. So it's said, neutrality not in the very strict sense like Austria used to define it, but neutrality means staying out and of conflicts, getting some sovereignty, developing more my own alternatives. So, just coming back to the...
Oh, give us some example. You said you were traveling. That's, I mean, we don't only have to talk about Austria. You said, where did you see...
I come with examples. So examples I come to East Central Europe, but also, if interestingly enough, Singapore is discussing it. Even Qatar is... Even though they have a strong military base in Qatar, but they're looking and saying, okay, but we have this military base, but it's exterritorial... we want to be independent in the rest of our policies. So we have similar situations in Eastern Europe, and we have in Moldova with Transnistria. We have some Russian militias there, but they call themselves situational neutral. So they all find definitions of neutrality to give them some sovereignty, and to my mind, Ukraine would be the best solution for Ukraine would be neutrality.
So we will never get into NATO, but we will also...
So, right. And look at the Austrian example. So we are not allowed to join a military alliance, which is basically NATO. Yeah. But we also have the state treaty. We are not allowed to join, at that time, Germany, a big power. So a combination for Ukraine would not join NATO, but not at the same time that Ukraine or parts of Ukraine would join Russia based on a treaty on international law would work. So it would work. So Ukraine would get its sovereignty, territorial integrity back. Russians would leave, basically, or Russian militias would leave. But there is the promise, based on international law, not to join NATO. So Ukraine has two alternatives in the long run. The Austrian solution, but I mapped out already just now. So getting sovereignty back, being neutral, not joining a military alliance, or the German solution. So permanent neutrality or a permanent division.
but interesting. But the Ukraine, if you lay it out like that, could still join the European Union.
Yeah. That's that. No. That's
not. I'm not advocating it. But
no. They could Austria join the European.
Yeah.
And I do think the Russians would go along with it. So
would accept that because they would build them up economically, and they would have benefits. They would at least pay them the gas.
No. They would go along with it.
So if I've understood that correctly, it is your position, because some people have doubted very vocally, especially the right, that Austria is still neutral.
Austria is neutral. We have flaws, neutrality. In some cases, we are not acting as a neutral state. So I mentioned this example of Middle East already.
Sorry, but let us just, so by the chancellor saying that a certain suggestion or a certain plan for the Middle East laid out by the Americans, by saying, yes, this is a good plan, actually overstepped the line.
Overstepped the line. Immediately, our foreign minister should talk to the Palestinian Authority about this. Also, when the chancellor goes to Trump, of course, will put pressure on him concerning the JCPOA. Our foreign minister, or the chancellor himself, probably the foreign minister, immediately should go to Iran and talk in Tehran about this. So only in that way Austria could offer itself as maybe as we talked about, as a meeting place, as a host. So contacting both sides. So I'm not saying that Kurz should not meet Trump. He should meet Trump, but he should meet the other side.
The message is important.
The message is
and it's a question of sovereignty. That's interesting. I like that. I never thought about it like that. So neutrality is also a way to make a stand in the world. Yeah?
That's what I edited this book. That's what I call engaged neutrality. So we had this traditional neutrality, which means the old Swiss idea, sitting still, stille sitzen. So keeping out from everywhere, what international lawyers call integral neutrality. So what I call is, and Kreisky already moved beyond this and said active neutrality. That means being active itself in Middle East and Marshall Plan for the Third World and international institutions. I call it engaged neutrality, which goes beyond this already. So that's bringing in conflicting parties as themselves, participating in peace operations, also participating in the European foreign and security policy, being active in the United Nations. So, and this bringing conflict parties together, that would be, as we talked about in the Middle East or Iran or Palestine, Israel, that would be one thing what we should do, and we should be very careful not to lose our reputation, what we have built up over the last decades.
That would be a very, very nice, not final final words. I don't like that term, but I want to go one step in another direction based on what you just said, engaged neutrality. And I wanted to end this conversation. I want to speak about something that I think you also know a bit about it, because you've been working with journalism all your life. I mean, I would say you're part a journalist as well, not only as a writer, but you've been, I think, part also of an association of journalists, and you've been speaking at, CNN calls you, BBC calls you, Al Jazeera calls you if they want to know something, IP calls you, and you come, thank you. I want to talk about journalism. There have been there are two specific fates of journalists, individuals. One is the story of Khashoggi on the one side, and on the other side is Julian Assange, that are debated very emotionally. And I find myself in an interesting position. I just want to lay that out, and I would like to hear what you think about that. On the one hand, there's Khashoggi, who worked for the Washington Post, blah, 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 who was executed in the most hideous manner, and we know that. We know that. I mean, I think I go out there and I say we know that. Cut to pieces, and there's been some uproar, but I would say a subdued one, and it's very noticeable what countries have not said anything about it, and in no way complained to the country and the people responsible. And there's, on the other hand, Assange, who I commend on certain things, but who has also been very active in twisting, turning, and fiddling with world politics, following his own interests, the way I appreciate it. So for me, it is interesting. There's the one engaged, neutral journalist, and there's the one very, very active journalist. And in both cases, it's journalists under attack. And that plays a role for me in anything that we talk about. Because how else, without journalism, should people know about the situations that are going on? Okay, I wrap this up. How do you see this situation? How do you see journalism today? Possibly, if you'd like to also comment on those specific cases. And is there not an enormous danger if these examples pass and go the way they are going, that we're losing maybe the most important aspect of a free society?
So what we have common, we academics and journalists, we have both an interest in getting information as much as possible. So without information, we would just act in a black hole. So that's we might do it differently, but without information of journalists, information from documents, you never could write a serious academic article neither. So, of course, there are journalists and journalists who do more than investigative part, and others who do more the analytical part as well. I wouldn't say that's neither nor. So, what the examples you mentioned, they all fall in this category, gathering information. So what we're all interested in. So, and in that case, they met their obligations. So they did what they had to do, getting information, getting it out to the public. That's we have Snowden, we have Assange.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention him, but it's a slightly different situation.
And we have Khashoggi. And governments do not like this. So, and all governments have this in any law of freedom of information. As they have this clause, as long as it doesn't affect our national security, which is a very broad term. So, and you can interpret it as much as you as government officials want to do it. So, and there is this line where governments say, okay, that's espionage. And espionage, many authoritarian regimes say, that's espionage, so you get the data which we're not entitled to. But also democratic states, there's the same thing as in the US, we have the same argument. So concerning Assange or Snowden. Defining national security should be very, very limited. So it should be, and we should discuss this, but what national security is really an argument to limit the work of journalists and academic. So that's too broad, and then we have this other argument about saying our intelligence agencies say this. You have to shut up because we know better, our intelligence agencies know better than you academic or you journalist. So what? You're contradicting what our intelligence is saying. So that's kind of makes the argument worthless. So the journalists and the academics fall silent. So that's what they want to do. So this national security should be limited, and journalists do not basically, I think, cross the line if they get out information to the public, like what Assange did with the killing of the civilians from in the Iraq war. Of course, there are some legal limits which I would respect. That maybe Assange is guilty and Snowden might be guilty not for espionage, but for stealing, for theft. So maybe theft. So that's what I can blame them, only stealing some data which was not legal. So but that's not espionage, and so that's maybe that could be blamed off. But getting out information is, of course, journalists have always the problem that they say, what are the sources? No sources, and I don't open up my sources. And if journalists are strict, so they cannot really blame for being a thief as well. But however, that's a legal argument I would accept, but not as the espionage and the national security argument.
Let me hang an appendix onto that. Yuval Harari, and you may an intellectual that is very popular on the internet at least, but in my humble opinion, a rather intelligent middle-aged man and historian and so on and so forth. He said, information is the most dangerous weapon, certainly in this time and the times to come, and it may not actually be necessary anymore to throw bombs and stuff, because if you have the right information at the right time, you can basically topple governments and steer countries into whatever direction you like. Viewed under that definition, what is that not a really, really interesting moment that we're living in? Because on the one hand, we say information, we bring it out, that's our job. But I've viewed with some of those gentlemen, it's being directed in a certain way, used in a certain way to alter results and alter elections and so on and so forth. How do we treat information under that perspective?
In one way, I guess, Trump is right. We live in a period of fake news. So, and fake news, it's not just the obvious ones. It's all the information which is distorted, turned around, which you even don't notice that it's turned around. If you go to a war zone and the information, you get information out, you don't know really what is true. You don't know who used chemical weapons in Syria. There's a blame game, and now there's some information that the chemical weapons attack was not done. This one, it was others as well.
By Assad.
By Assad. Also the incidents that we have in the Gulf. So many of those incidents are attributed to Iran. Iran, some of them admit that we do this. Others might have been done by ISIS or by
some secret service.
That's as well.
Yeah.
Militias which do not follow the commands by Iran, they're living on themselves. But immediately the next day you hear you blame them somebody, your enemy. So you don't know really what the information, what the correct information. Yeah, that's a good question. What the correct information is, and governments lie, of course, but also democratic governments lie. So they have even more legitimacy. So they believe them better than you believe maybe Putin or Xi Jinping. But there's some statistic that trumps how many 1,000 lies he said. So. That's I guess for the future that's really a problem, because many journalists do not have the capacity and academics and the time to really do their original research whether that's true. So most of them just copy what the agencies are saying, and the agencies copy what they get from the intelligence agencies and from the government. So it's a one-sided process, and I realize that more and more that many of my colleagues just copy or accept information what they get from the mainstream media, and so I do think that's almost an unsolvable problem, because it's hard to live in a world where you say I don't believe anything anymore, so you can't do this. So that's not so. But in many ways, journalists and academics have to be very careful what information they use and what information. So the obvious doctored pictures, somehow you find out, so somebody will find out. But there's hidden information, clandestine, so that's, I know better than you do. So that's a real problem. I do think that's a real, that's a dangerous world we're moving to.
Well, I'll leave it there. But conversation, I think conversation, it's like you say this, I say this, we talk about it.
I think that's that's a good final word.
Keep an open mind, dear friends. Keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Hope to see you soon again. Yeah. And all the viewers out there, it was a great pleasure. I hope you stuck with us. Revisit this kitchen talk, a lot to think about, and let us know if you're interested in doing this again. And yeah, stay aware. Tschüss.
Idealism prevails.
Make the world a better place.